I want to bring in my panel today, Labor frontbencher Stephen Jones and Liberal MP Tim Wilson. Welcome to both of you.
Good to be with you.
Good to be with you.
Tim Wilson, is Michelle Landry's admission that she doesn't know how much money Adani has contributed to her election campaign good enough? Shouldn't you? Do you know how much is coming into your campaign?
Well, I know there are donations that are made all the time from good, solid citizens. If they want to, they can go to timwilson.com.
No, stop that now.
Donate. There's a button straight away. So, but...
You've already got into trouble for that sort of thing,
Tim.
That's
never going to get an invite back. Please continue.
So those options are always available, and anybody who wants to donate in a democracy should be free to do so. But she'll have to answer that. I have no idea. OK,
but the issue of influence, given this is such a big story, this Adani issue, and it's very contentious in the political campaign. I just want to return to you, Tim, on that issue. Do you accept, though, that this Adani issue is playing out very differently in Queensland to Victoria, where there are concerns around Adani?
Well, that plays out differently in different communities. If you've got a community that depends on projects to go ahead, obviously they're going to take a very positive view of a project that can create jobs and opportunities for people locally. That doesn't mean they dismiss the concerns that many of us have about making sure we do things in an environmentally sustainable way and create environmentally sustainable jobs for the future. But obviously, if those jobs don't directly impact on you, you're going to take a slightly different view. This is where having responsible leadership at a national level under the coalition government around reducing our emissions while creating jobs for the future is so critical.
Stephen Jones, are you enthusiastic about the Adani proposal?
Well, I think I'm the only person in this debate who's spent any time around a coal mine. I've grown up, lived, represent a coal mining district. Where I come from, we get the coal mines to pay us to dig up the coal and build railway tracks, not the other way round. So I'm not an enthusiastic supporter of government subsidies going towards a coal mine.
That's not the question, though.
I've got to say, I look at Adani, there's about 50 coal mines in Queensland today, in the Surat and Bowen Basin, more than 30. I frankly don't see that it should be treated any different to any of the others. Particularly now that it's a scaled-back proposition. But yeah, of course, it has to meet all of the environmental propositions. My own belief, based on the briefings I've had and the people that I talk to in the industry, is that it's a very marginal project and it probably won't get built.
Do you want it to get built, though? Do you wish it would meet all of its objectives, all of the, pass all the tests so that it can get built?
Yeah, let's get back to the economics of it. If it's an economically viable project and can stand on its own feet, that it doesn't cut corners on the environment, that it meets all of those requirements, it's environmentally sustainable and it doesn't need government subsidies, I don't think it should be treated any different to any of the other 50 mines that are currently operating in Queensland or any of the other mines that operate in my electorate. It shouldn't get any favourable special treatment. And I'd be very alarmed if it was going to.
Tim Wilson, according to a Triple J survey, 89% of the young people surveyed claim politicians aren't working in their best interests of the planet. This is backed up by a nationwide consultation by UNICEF Australia. They've done a report too that found the vast majority of those surveyed are frustrated by inaction on climate change. Has the vocal support for the Adani mine by some of your colleagues in Queensland made it difficult for you, for instance, in your own electorate?
No, I mean, I'm the only federal member of Parliament that's actually studied climate science. I'm a qualified carbon accountant. I take these issues very seriously. And that's where we can actually talk directly about what the government is actually achieving in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in a way that takes the country forward, leads the energy transition, particularly around, we've got a record amount of investment in renewables. We've also, of course, got a series of policies designed to specifically reduce greenhouse gas emissions while providing and creating the jobs of the future.
But my question was, what's happening in your electorate? Is this issue coming up?
It comes up from time to time. It always has, and will continue to do so. And because people know that I'm concerned about the issues themselves, they're not afraid to raise them. And that's where providing the clarity and sense of purpose and leadership about how the government is leading that transition is so critical as part of the national discussion.
So today, if I can bring you back in, Stephen, there has been a focus by the government on Bill Shorten providing modelling on how your carbon abatement policies will affect the economy. Bill Shorten saying it won't affect the economy, and the government saying, hang on a minute, it certainly will, and you needed to provide the modelling. So will you provide the modelling?
Well, it will affect the economy in this sense that if we get some certainty in the electricity market with some market rules laid down for the long term, you'll get investment back into the area where there has been an investment strike. will have greater certainty for industry and business, so they'll know where and how they can invest so we can grow the economy, particularly in areas of manufacturing which are leaving the country at the moment because all of the uncertainty. I know that Mark Butler will have more to say around the economic modelling and other things over the course of the campaign, but the one thing I'm very certain of, the Coalition can't say they're pro-environment and pro-certainty when every time we put up the only policy which is going to bring down emissions and create certainty within the energy generation sector, they try and make political points out of it. I mean, we went to the length of attempting to adopt their energy policy, or one of them, and they scrapped it themselves. They've had 11 energy policies over the last 5 years. They're going to an election without one. Alternatively, on our side, we have a climate policy, we have an energy policy, and I think business, to a person, is welcoming it.
Tim Wilson, Labor makes the point that where's your modelling on a range of issues? You know, your 1.25 million jobs promise, where's the modelling there? Your big stick legislation promise, where's the modelling there? Your electric vehicle target, where's the modelling there? Can you really go around saying to Labor, show us the modelling, when you haven't provided the modelling on key policy initiatives that you have?
Well, we're going through, and of course we'll provide the evidence to back up all of our policies.
So all of those, the modelling for all of that will be provided?
Well, firstly, a lot of those things, as far as I'm aware, aren't actually just model propositions. They're actually things that
like your tax cuts.
And just like our tax cuts, that will actually deliver reductions in personal income tax for millions of Australians, and that's all included in the budget and goes through its own modelling process. So we will provide the policy detail that's required to substantiate our policies throughout the election campaign. That's in comparison to Labor, which is actually, frankly, tearing down its policy detail, trying to hide it, and to take it away from the Australian people and to actually see the full consequences of a Labor government.
To that point, we have put more policy out into the marketplace. Since any opposition in the last 20 years, nobody can argue that we are trying to hide our policies. We've been very, very transparent about them, and many of them we have taken to the... I listened to you in silence, Tim. Many of them we've taken to 2 elections, so nobody can argue. You might like our policies, you might want to take political shots at them, but nobody can say that we haven't been very, very transparent.
Okay, but they have been pulled off the website and they're being...
Can I just go to that? Like, we're updating... Yeah, we're going out updating our website almost on an hourly basis. And we're trying to ensure that the stuff is up there in a very digestible form. All of the policies that we have announced to date have had detailed background papers on them. Some of it's, in fact, most of it's up on the website in one form or another. And if you contrast that to what's on the Liberal Party website, I think they've got 3 policies up there at the moment. So they're the last people who can be poking the finger at Labor about transparencies and what is or isn't up on the website. Can we have a serious debate about serious policies, not what's on a website?
Tim Wilson, he makes a point about transparency, and Labor has been pretty upfront about a lot of its policies for a long time. We've known, in fact, that's what's given you all this time to argue against them. Are you being fully transparent on your own website, giving details, the modelling, all of these questions I ask you? I mean, the modelling isn't actually provided for a lot of your own contentious policies.
Well, Patricia, for starters, we're in government. And when you're in government, you're developing policies all the time. And if you go onto the government websites, whether it be in the environment or energy or anywhere else, all the detail and all the information is available there. Of course, coming up to an election campaign, Labor has to go out and put out all of their policies because they're not in government and they've got to clearly state what they're going to do. What you're going to get from a re-elected coalition government is stable, methodical government into the future, building on the policy achievements we've delivered in this term of Parliament. But of course, we're going to be putting more detail out there into the future. Of course, we just had the budget, which is a pretty big policy statement about what it is we're going to try and achieve if re-elected. And there was certainly a lot of information in the budget. In fact, it was volumes thick.
OK, I just want to ask very targeted questions of both of you just on things that I've observed. I'm going to start with you, Tim Wilson, because we know that the Labor Party is really focusing on zeroing in on someone like Peter Dutton in Victoria, who they, have identified as being pretty unpopular in Victoria. Do you accept that Peter Dutton is a pretty contentious figure in Victoria?
Oh, every politician has people who like them and dislike them.
Do you accept, though, the question was that in Victoria, Peter Dutton is very contentious and disliked?
Well, first, I haven't seen any polling, and that was where I was going to, which is every politician has people who like them and dislike them. I haven't seen any polling or research that shows the popularity of one politician in Victoria versus another. We do know that Bill Shorten is very unpopular, according to all consistent public opinion polling. The polling shows that people see him as untrustworthy as part of the discussion. But you know how every other member of Parliament rates, I don't know.
What sort of feedback have you got on Peter Dutton?
Personally, he doesn't come up much in conversations, with all due respect to Peter.
OK, but, you know, clearly he made those comments about people not being, you know, feeling safe in Melbourne streets. Do you think that hurt him?
Well, I actually know people who came up and said, thank you, finally somebody giving voice to the concerns that we have. And, of course, I know other people who said the reverse. It's not equivocating. People have a diversity of perspectives on lots of issues and lots of personalities. And that's ultimately what happens in politics. If you take a stand, people are going to make judgment calls one way or the other. The worst thing is to be somebody that people see as untrustworthy, like Bill Shorten, where they don't even trust the policy proposal he's taking today. And the evidence in the past 24 hours shows that they have entire justification to do so.
Stephen Jones, I keep hearing from people on both sides of politics that this election is tightening. Do you feel that on the ground, that it is tightening?
Yeah, look, I think it is going to be a close election. I think there's no doubt about it. People are concerned that we've had a chaotic, unstable opposition, and as we go into the election campaign, that chaos and instability continues. You've got the former Prime Minister sticking his hand up saying he's ready to serve at any time the current Prime Minister falters. Same with the National Party, and they're seeing that chaos and instability continue. But despite all of that, I think this election, like all elections, will be close. And that's why we will be using every day of the next 5 weeks to take our message about a fairer Australia, ensuring we're looking after low and middle income earners, dealing with the challenge of energy and climate change and creating jobs for all Australians. We'll be taking our policies and messages to the people. And as to the popularity or not of somebody like Peter Dutton, I can guarantee that Tim won't be inviting him down to Goldstein to launch his campaign. I mean, Peter Dutton
I've already launched my campaign,
himself.
Stephen.
Are you going to be inviting him to campaign with you, though? It's an interesting question.
Sorry, was that a direct?
Yeah, to you, Tim, yeah.
He won't be in your electorate campaigning, will he?
The person who'll be campaigning in the Goldstein electorate will be myself, because that's the focus I've got, and I would hope that every other member of Parliament will be focusing on their electorate. Not, I mean, if they're welcome to my electorate, of course, but I don't think that's
you do
gonna
have
happen.
people that come to your electorate. What kind of federal, figures work well in your electorate? When you ask someone to campaign, who works well?
Well, I haven't actually asked anybody to campaign at this point, because I'm confident that with enough support from the community, that being their local representative will be enough. But if anyone wants to come and campaign, I'm sure they're welcome to do so.
OK, well, we don't want you to spruik for donations again, so let's park that one. Tim Wilson, the IPA has released its list of 20 policies to fix Australia. Do you agree with these proposals? I mean, one of them, for instance, is privatising the ABC.
Well, firstly, I've been too busy campaigning, Patricia. I haven't actually even seen the list, and I've never been a spruiker for that policy. I've always believed that the ABC needs reform. I think it needs to decentralise and become more reflective of the Australian community. I resolutely stand by my view on that, but others are entitled to their view. OK, so on the ABC proposal, but there's other ones, contentious ones, 18C, for instance, that's gone quiet. Are you still a staunch believer in that? I've always been a believer of making sure the law stops people being harassed or intimidated on the basis of any basis in society. That's always been the basis in which I've engaged in this discussion. I've made a series of policy proposals, including to last time it was reviewed, and I think it's a basis of a fair law that will respect all Australians, and my view hasn't changed on that. OK. And Stephen, I do want to pick up on a point that Tim's already made, but I think it's an important and interesting one, because every press conference I see of the Prime Minister, and I watch all the press conferences, all of them, every minute. I take a lot of notes. And the Prime Minister keeps making this essentially a referendum between him and Bill Shorten. Clearly he's banking, or he thinks that Bill Shorten's unpopular. Is that a weakness for Labor? Is that something you're concerned about?
Look, I think the strength that Bill Shorten has that Scott Morrison doesn't have, isn't it? Quite apart from the fact that we've got a cohesive policy platform, more than any other opposition in the last 20 years, is that Bill leads a united team that backs him 100%. Scott Morrison can't say that. Scott Morrison can't say that he leads a united team that backs him 100%. And Bill does, and he's surrounded by people with such talent as Tanya Plibersek, Chris Bowen, Penny Wong, Jim Chalmers, in fact our entire front bench team. As Bill often says, he'd put any one of them up against any one of Scott Morrison's team and they would beat them hands down. And I think that's the strength of Bill Shorten and Labor's offering is the talent we have in our front bench. In fact, the real challenge we'll have if we are so lucky as to form government after the next election is what do we do with all the talented people on inside the Labor Party caucus?
Okay,
So I think it's an exciting time.
The jobs. So Tim Wilson, this issue of unity is being campaigned on by Labor because you've had 3 Prime Ministers. I mean, that's a fact. You've had 3 Prime Ministers in your term. In your 6 years, 3 Prime Ministers.
And 2 Deputy Prime Ministers.
Yep, OK, we can make the list longer, but I'm just focusing on the Prime Ministers here. Given that issue is an issue, the Prime Minister keeps referring to questions around Malcolm Turnbull being removed as Canberra bubble issues. Is it really a Canberra bubble issue to ask questions about the removal of a Prime Minister?
Well, this election is a focus on the future of Australia.
I asked you a really specific question.
I understand.
Is it a Canberra bubble question?
And I'm answering the question, which is this election is actually about the future of Australia. And so there are, of course, things that have gone on in the past, and I've always been an advocate for stability. I mean, the previous government, Labor government, had 3 Prime Ministers as well. So their call for sudden incredible capacity to deliver unity is frankly farcical. But the team is absolutely focused and united behind Scott Morrison to be Prime Minister, and we've actually changed the rules around how these things happen. You know that, Patricia. So the era of deposing Prime Ministers is well and truly in the past. And go back to the point Stephen was making before, the real issue is actually on the substantive policy alternatives in the country. And what we saw in the past 24 hours was Bill Shorten being the Judas to the Australian retirees, particularly self-funded retirees, where he's saying one thing and doing another. And these are the sorts of things that will stick in people's minds, is the untrustworthiness of the Labor Party platform and whether they can rely on an alternative government to deliver in their best interests.
But just to clarify, you think it's fair enough that people would want to ask questions?
Well, people are entitled to ask any questions, but what we know is that the rules have been changed, so it can't happen. So now it's in the past, and we're focused on the future as a united team to govern the country.
Just final question.
Tony Abbott is already putting up his hand. Barnaby Joyce is already putting up his hand and saying as soon as the election's done, we're ready to serve. We want to replace the current mob. So you've got the former Prime Minister and the former Deputy Prime Minister saying we want our old jobs back. How can you say you're going forward being unified when these guys have stated that in the last 2 weeks?
If we're going to go down that path, Stephen, I remember when most of the Labor Party didn't vote for Bill Shorten, the Labor Party parliamentarians didn't vote for Bill Shorten to be leader, but we're actually focused on food.
No,
it's just
not true. He did get the majority of the parliament.
Oh, right, sorry.
No, he did. It was the membership.
Sorry, you're quite right.
Yep, sorry, I've got to fact check you there. I covered that campaign too. I've covered a few. But Tim, I want to just get your thoughts finally on Israel Folau. What do you make of what's happened to him? Because he wants to now challenge this. Has his freedom of speech been repressed?
I have concerns about this case, and I've watched with coarse interest in the past. I've made very clear statements about the need for people to be able to express their views on something like religion and their religious belief without censorship. I don't know the details of the EBA or the arrangements, the contractual arrangements that sit between him and Israel Folau, but I would have thought that Rugby Australia should be very cautious in how they're conducting themselves, because rugby isn't just a game for people who are agnostic or atheist. It should be in a free, pluralistic democracy that should have space for everybody to express their opinion. So
does that mean you query these kinds of clauses in any employment contracts which curtail freedom of speech?
Well, I don't know the details of this one, and sometimes you can have policies in employment contracts which do go too far, but my understanding is that generally contracts have a standard proposition around not doing unnecessary harm or damage. Quoting the Bible or reciting a well-established position around morality and private morality, I don't think crosses that line.
So whatever he has published so far, you don't think that's crossed the line?
The brutal truth is I actually haven't seen what he said, so I don't want to get into a judgment call, but I've always been a strong advocate for free speech. I don't believe people should be harassed or intimidated. That's my view. That's always been my view. But from what I've seen, and it's a limited amount, I'm focused on working for the community that I represent this time, it wouldn't have crossed that line.
OK, thank you so much to both of you. It's been a great chat. Come back again.
Good to be with you.
But next time, don't spruik for donations, Tim Wilson. That was frontbencher Stephen Jones from the Labor Party and Liberal MP Tim Wilson there. And interesting comments there from Tim Wilson, who's really been on the record for a long time on his views on free speech, but backing Israel Folau's right to speech, not endorsing the comments, but right to speech. So that's a pretty interesting perspective there too.